Dive podcast show. Let's dive in the heart of this nation under sky so blue. There's a spirit that's stirring values strong and true. From the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe. Conservative values in our souls, they're interweaved. With courage and with honor, we'll hold our ground. For freedom, for tradition in this land we found. We cherish our Constitution.
All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive today into the history and controversies surrounding Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
It's, our main source this time is Samuel Carter's article, The True History of Planned Parenthood.
Okay.
And let me tell you, it's packed with information.
Wow.
So we're going to start by unpacking the organization's kind of messy beginnings,
Right.
focusing especially on the founders' views, those early ideas. And then we're going to shift gears and look at some modern-day statistics and what those might mean for us.
Makes sense.
So really digging into the past and the present here.
All right, sounds good.
Planned Parenthood's history.
Well, it's one that, keeps coming up.
Yeah.
And there's a good reason for that.
Right.
I think understanding where it all started is really key to understanding a lot of the debates that we see happening today.
Absolutely. So let's rewind all the way back to 1916.
Okay.
Carter's article really paints Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, as this revolutionary for women's reproductive rights.
It is fascinating to think about that context.
Yeah.
Back then, women had very limited say over their own bodies
Right.
and their reproductive choices.
Yeah.
And Sanger really was pushing for women to have that autonomy in a time when that was, a radical concept.
He was definitely a fighter, pushing for those rights.
Yeah.
But Carter also brings up this point that Sanger was really influenced by the eugenics movement. And actually, there's this quote from Sanger in the article where she's talking about using birth control to create, she says, a race of thoroughbreds. Pretty strong words, right?
Yes, and that's where things get a little complicated.
Yeah.
So the eugenics movement promoted this idea of selective breeding to improve the human race.
Right.
And this led to, unfortunately, some very harmful and discriminatory practices.
And this is really where Sanger's legacy gets messy.
Right.
On the one hand, she's advocating for women's empowerment, but then on the other hand, she's holding these beliefs that are, really problematic today, targeting specific racial and ethnic groups.
It's important to acknowledge that duality, Sanger's fight for reproductive rights was sort of intertwined with these views that we consider deeply problematic today.
Right.
And her legacy is complex.
Yeah.
And it fuels a lot of the debate around Planned Parenthood even now.
Okay, so we've got this complicated backdrop, right?
Yeah.
Then the article brings up this thing called the Negro Project, which was a Planned Parenthood initiative led by Sanger to bring birth control to African-American communities.
This is particularly interesting because it's been interpreted in very different ways.
Okay, so what are we talking about here? What are the different perspectives on this Negro Project?
Well, on one hand, some argue that it was a genuine effort to empower Black women by providing them with choices, reproductive choices, which they largely lacked at the time.
Which, kind of seems to align with that whole idea of giving women more autonomy that Sanger was all about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But others view the Negro Project through the lens of those eugenics beliefs we just discussed.
So are they saying it was more about controlling the Black population, less about giving them more choices?
That's the argument, yeah.
Okay.
Critics see it as, a continuation of those discriminatory practices that were sadly, very prevalent during that time.
Right.
Even today, the Negro Project is a source of, intense debate. It really illustrates those complexities around Planned Parenthood origins.
It's like this one project just kind of embodies the, those conflicting interpretations of Sanger's mission.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Yeah.
It raises those questions about motives and outcomes that are still relevant to the conversations around Planned Parenthood today.
Definitely relevant today.
Yeah.
And speaking of today, let's shift gears and look at some modern statistics.
Okay.
The article highlights some pretty stark realities when it comes to racial disparities in abortion rates. And it uses data from the CDC from 2019.
The numbers are pretty striking.
Yeah.
The abortion rate for Black women was significantly higher than any other group.
Really?
Yeah, we're talking 23.8 abortions per 1,000 women aged 15-44.
Wow.
Compared to 18.4 for Hispanic women and just 6.6 for white women.
That is a huge difference.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, like, what factors are contributing to such a disparity?
It's complex, right?
Yeah.
And I think it points to the need to look beyond just the numbers.
Right.
And delve deeper into the possible reasons behind these differences.
So what are some of those possible reasons? What factors are we talking about here?
Well, we need to think about things like access to quality health care,
Okay.
education about contraception, and even the financial ability to afford those services.
So it's like a whole web of interconnected issues, not just one single cause.
Exactly. These statistics don't exist in a vacuum.
Right.
To understand them, we need to consider all those social, economic, and systemic factors that might be influencing these trends.
Right. It's all connected. So these disparities raise a lot of questions. And when it comes to Planned Parenthood, the issue of funding is, always front and center.
Mm-hmm.
The article explains how taxpayer money through programs like Medicaid does end up contributing to the funding of abortions.
That's right, although there are some significant limitations.
Okay.
The Hyde Amendment back in 1976, it generally prohibits using federal funds for abortions.
Right. The Hyde Amendment, I remember reading about that. So is that it? No federal money for abortions at all?
Well, there are some exceptions.
Okay.
Federal funds can be used in cases of rape, incest, or if the mother's life is in danger.
Ah, okay. So there are those specific situations, but outside of those, it's a no-go.
Yeah, pretty much.
Does that mean states are just left to figure things out on their own then?
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
Some states use their own funds to cover abortions for low-income women. So it's like they're working around those Hyde Amendment restrictions.
It sounds like a real patchwork of policies across the country then.
It is. Yeah.
Wow.
And that variation in funding and access,
Right.
it contributes to that ongoing debate.
And speaking of debate,
Yeah.
Carter points out that hundreds of millions of dollars are spent every year on abortion services.
Yeah.
That's not a small amount.
It illustrates the scale of this,
Yeah.
And when you have those, significant financial figures involved,
Right.
the ethical and political arguments around, how those funds are used, they become even more heated.
It feels like the whole conversation around funding is kind of a microcosm of the larger debate about Planned Parenthood.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
You see that clash between those who believe taxpayer money should never be used for something they see as morally wrong.
Right.
And those who believe that access to safe and legal abortion is a fundamental right.
Yeah, regardless of how much money you make.
Precisely.
It's like two totally different perspectives. Yeah.
And that fundamental disagreement is really at the heart of so many of these controversies surrounding Planned Parenthood.
Both historically and today?
Exactly.
Wow, we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive.
We have.
It's, we've journeyed through this complicated history of Planned Parenthood, explored that controversial legacy of Margaret Sanger, and delved into some pretty, stark modern-day statistics about racial disparities and the whole funding debate.
It's a lot to unpack, for sure.
Yeah, a lot to unpack.
But I think it sets the stage for a deeper understanding of the complexities surrounding Planned Parenthood and its role in these broader societal conversations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore those broader implications.
Okay.
We're going to see how all of these seemingly disparate threads, they actually connect to a much bigger picture.
Sounds good.
So stay tuned for that.
All right, welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about how complex the conversation around Planned Parenthood can be.
It really is, yeah.
And how deeply it's woven into all these larger issues we face as a society.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. The more we explore, the more connections we uncover.
Yeah, definitely.
And one of the things that keeps coming to mind is how all this impacts the communities that are most affected.
Right.
Like we've talked about these big concepts.
Yeah.
But what about the everyday experiences of the people, actually living with these realities?
You've hit on a crucial point. It's easy to get lost in the statistics and the debates. But the lived experiences of individuals in these communities are so essential to understanding the true human impact.
Right, because their stories often get left out of those abstract arguments.
Exactly, and we need to bring those voices to the forefront.
It's one thing to discuss abortion rates, but to hear from women who have faced those difficult choices, often in really challenging circumstances, it just adds a whole other dimension.
It does.
It makes you realize that, having a right on paper
Right.
doesn't always mean you can actually exercise that, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Especially if you're already dealing with systemic disadvantages.
Right, and that brings us back to that idea of comprehensive health care.
Okay.
It's not enough to just focus on abortion services.
Right.
We need to make sure people have access to a full range of reproductive health care options.
So we're talking about things like contraception, prenatal care, comprehensive sex education.
Exactly. It's about giving people the tools and the knowledge they need to make informed choices about their bodies, about their futures.
Empowerment through information and access. I like it.
Yeah, exactly.
And when we're talking about empowerment, we can't ignore the issue of systemic racism within healthcare.
Right, that's something Carter doesn't go into much detail on.
Right.
But it's so crucial to acknowledge.
And not just acknowledge, like, we need to actually dismantle those structures that perpetuate those inequalities, you know?
Absolutely, and that takes a multifaceted approach.
Right.
We have to look at implicit bias among healthcare providers.
Okay.
Make sure resources are allocated equitably, create culturally sensitive care models.
It's like recognizing that healthcare isn't one size fits all.
Right.
And that we need approaches that are tailored to the specific needs of diverse communities.
Exactly.
But it's not just healthcare, is it? We were talking earlier about economic factors playing a role in all this, too.
You're right. Economic opportunity and stability, they have a huge impact on reproductive choices.
Yeah, because if you're struggling to make ends meet, accessing healthcare, affording contraception,
Right.
or even considering options like adoption, it all becomes way more complicated.
It's all connected. Reproductive rights are fundamentally intertwined with economic justice.
You can't separate those two.
Nope.
Okay, so we've talked about access, equity, these systemic problems.
Yeah.
What does all this mean for, the person listening? What's the takeaway here?
It's a call to action. This deep dive is just the start.
Okay.
We want our listeners to go beyond the headlines,
Right.
engage with these issues on a deeper level, and realize that the conversation around Planned Parenthood isn't just about abortion.
Right. It's about a whole web of interconnected issues that impact individuals, families, entire communities.
Exactly. It's about understanding the history, recognizing the complexities, and advocating for solutions that promote equity, access, informed choice for everyone.
And making sure that the people who are most affected by these policies,
Yes.
that their voices are heard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like listening to their experiences, amplifying their perspectives, that's crucial.
We need to move beyond that judgment and rhetoric,
Okay.
create space for nuanced dialogue and collaborative action.
It's easy to fall into those polarized positions, but real progress requires understanding the nuances.
Exactly, and understanding that this is an ongoing conversation.
Yes.
It's evolving, this narrative,
Right.
and it needs our continued attention and engagement.
We've done a lot of exploring in this deep dive, haven't we?
We have.
We've gone through the history, the controversies, the statistics, the funding, the broader societal implications. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
What stands out to you as we kind of wrap up this part of the conversation?
I think what strikes me is how often these discussions get stuck in those polarized viewpoints. We've really tried to highlight the nuances, the complexities,
Right.
and finding solutions, or even just having productive conversations, requires moving beyond those oversimplifications.
That's a great point. And I think one way to move beyond those oversimplifications is to bring in fresh perspectives.
Right.
We've talked about disparities, access, even ethical considerations.
Yeah.
But it makes me wonder, where does something like comprehensive sex education fit into all this?
That's an interesting connection.
Yeah.
You're focusing on a preventative approach instead of just looking at what happens after an unplanned pregnancy.
Right, exactly. If we're talking about empowering people to make informed choices about their reproductive health, shouldn't education be like a top priority?
Absolutely. Comprehensive sex education gives people the knowledge to make those choices responsibly.
And it's not just about preventing pregnancy, right?
No.
It's about understanding our own body, navigating healthy relationships,
Right?
understanding consent, and really grappling with all the complexities of sexual health.
It's about giving people the tools to really take charge of their own well-being.
Okay, so let's play this out. If more people had access to accurate information and resources from a younger age,
Yeah,
could that potentially impact those statistics we were looking at?
it's definitely possible.
Yeah.
And there's research to back that up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, studies have shown that these programs can lead to delayed sexual activity, increased use of contraception, reduced rates of STIs.
And thinking back to those racial disparities,
Right.
wouldn't ensuring that this kind of education is available to all communities, regardless of their background,
Yes,
be a big step towards addressing those inequalities?
absolutely. equitable access to quality sex education could be huge in leveling the playing field
Yeah.
and empowering individuals from all walks of life to make those informed choices about their reproductive health.
So instead of just reacting to situations,
Mhm.
we're talking about shifting to prevention.
Right.
Investing in education as a way to tackle some of the root causes of these complex issues.
It's a proactive approach
Yeah.
that recognizes the power of giving people the knowledge and resources early on,
Yeah.
equipping them to make healthy choices and approach their sexual and reproductive lives with confidence.
It feels like we've come full circle, you know? We started with this complicated history,
Uh-huh.
dove into this messy present.
Yeah.
And now we're landing on this potential path forward
Right.
that prioritizes education, equity, informed choice. It feels hopeful.
Hopeful is a good word for it, and that's exactly the message I want people to take away from this deep dive.
Okay.
These issues are complex, challenging,
Yeah.
often very emotional,
Yeah.
but they're not insurmountable. We can make progress.
So how do we do that? What's the next step?
It starts with engagement,
Okay.
by having thoughtful dialogue, seeking out diverse perspectives,
Uh-huh.
advocating for solutions that are based on evidence.
Right.
We can create a future where reproductive health and rights are truly accessible to all.
Beautifully said. So to our listener, we encourage you to keep diving deep,
Yes.
keep questioning, keep learning,
And keep engaged.
and keep engaging in these critical conversations because your voice matters.
It does.
And you can make a difference.
Absolutely.
Welcome back to our deep dive on Planned Parenthood. We've explored so much already.
We have.
The history, the controversies, those statistics, the
Yeah.
funding debates, even those broader societal implications. It's been a lot,
Definitely a journey.
but a really insightful one, I think.
I agree.
And in that last part, we were talking about that shift, from reacting to things to being more preventative.
Mm-hmm.
And that comprehensive sex education is like a key piece of that.
It is.
And I think that's a perfect place to pick back up because if we're, really serious about finding solution
Right.
and creating a future where everyone has that knowledge, those resources to make informed choices,
Uh-huh.
then access to quality sex ed has got to be a priority.
Absolutely. And it's something Carter touches on in his article.
Yeah.
He emphasizes, needing solutions that go beyond just providing or restricting access to abortion.
Okay.
He talks about promoting what he calls responsible sexual behavior.
Okay, I can see how that connects to the sex ed idea.
Yeah.
But what does responsible sexual behavior even mean here?
It is a bit broad.
Yeah.
And Carter doesn't really get into specifics,
Right.
but I think we can kind of interpret it as, encompassing a range of behaviors, choices
Okay.
that prioritize well-being, both individual and, respect for others.
So like understanding consent, using contraception effectively,
Yeah.
getting tested for STIs, having open communication with your partners. Is that kind of what we're talking about?
Exactly. And comprehensive sex ed really plays a vital role in, equipping people with that knowledge, those skills to do those things.
Right, to actually engage in those healthy behaviors.
It's about giving individuals the tools to make those informed decisions about their sexual health, their relationships.
And if we think back to some of those issues we've been discussing, like
Yeah.
those racial disparities we saw in unintended pregnancy rates,
Yeah.
wouldn't access to comprehensive sex ed be like a crucial step in addressing those inequalities?
I think it could be huge, a real game changer.
Yeah.
If we can make sure young people, no matter their background, their socioeconomic status,
Right.
have access to accurate, comprehensive information about sexual health, it could have a ripple effect.
Like we could actually see those unintended pregnancies go down.
Yeah.
Reduction in STIs, and maybe even start to close that gap in those racial disparities.
It's a powerful idea, and it goes beyond just the individual level,
Right.
It's about communities, about social justice,
Mm-hmm.
and creating a society where everyone has the chance to thrive.
And it's not just about preventing those negative outcomes either, right?
Right.
Comprehensive sex ed is also about promoting those positive sexual experiences.
Absolutely.
Healthy relationships, a sense of agency when it comes to your own body, your own choices.
Empowering people to navigate their sexual lives with confidence and respect.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential benefits, but
Yeah.
how do we actually make this happen? Because it seems like there's a lot of pushback against this kind of education.
There is, and a lot of that pushback comes from, misinformation, fear,
Okay.
discomfort around talking about sexuality openly and honestly.
It's like we as a society have this weird taboo about talking about sex.
Yeah.
Even though it's a natural part of life.
And that silence can be really harmful.
Yeah.
It leads to misinformation, shame, and not having access to that knowledge and those resources people need.
So what can we do to change that? How do we move towards a more open, honest approach?
I think it starts with advocating.
Okay.
Advocating for those comprehensive sex ed policies.
Right.
At the local level, the state level, even the national level.
Pushing for those curricula that are inclusive, evidence-based, and appropriate for different ages.
Exactly.
And it also takes having those tough conversations in our own families, our communities, right?
Absolutely.
Breaking down those taboos, creating spaces where young people can ask questions and get accurate information.
It's about normalizing those conversations about sex, relationships, making it clear that these aren't things to be ashamed of, to avoid, but they're important parts of being human.
Right. We got to be able to talk about them.
And they deserve open, honest discussion.
And if we can do that, if we can create that kind of culture that really embraces comprehensive sex ed,
yeah,
I think we'll actually start to see real progress on some of these issues we've been talking about.
I agree. It's a long game.
Yeah.
But it's a game worth playing.
So to our listener, we encourage you to keep exploring,
Yes.
dive deeper into these issues, the complexities of reproductive health and rights.
And remember, you don't have to have all the answers.
That's right.
It's about asking those questions,
Yeah.
being open to different viewpoints, and engaging in those conversations.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of Planned Parenthood.
It has been a fascinating journey.
It has. Challenging.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think a hopeful one.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
We hope you gained some valuable insights and maybe even, a renewed sense of motivation to get involved in these important issues.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those brains buzzing.
Choose life. It's just not right. Stop taking all these babies' lives. Listeners, Planned Parenthood Deep Dive Podcast Show. Let's dive in the heart of this nation under skies so blue. There's a spirit that's stirring values strong and true. From the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe. Conservative values in our souls, they're interweaved. With courage and with honor, we'll hold our ground. For freedom, for tradition, in this land we found. We cherish our Constitution, the words that set us free. The right to bear arms, to speak and to agree. We honor our forefathers who fought with steadfast might for the dream of a nation shining bright in the night. In every town and village, in every heart and home, we'll uphold our principles, together we'll roam. Through trials and through triumphs, we'll never lose our way. With conservative values